In Chapter 4, you learned the endings that are attached to nouns and adjectives in order to indicate gender and number. In Chapter 5, we introduced you to how the words shift in their vowels when these endings are added. And in Chapter 6, we want to talk about the function of nouns and adjectives and how they relate to one another. In this first portion of Chapter 6, we're going to discuss the role of adjectives. Hebrew adjectives have to agree with the word that they modify in gender and number. Unlike English, where we use a consistent word for the application to any gender or number, Hebrew requires an adjustment so that the words match according to the forms that you learned in Chapter 4. So in English, we use the word good for male, female, singular, or plural. A good man, a good woman, good men, and good women require no modification of the adjective. But Hebrew wants to show you the relationship between the words in the sentence and to make that clear, and as a result, they are adjusted according to gender and number. So in this first example, you can see that the expression good kings is expressed as melachim tovim, good kings. The adjective good clearly designates masculine plural individuals because it's modifying the kings. In the second example, that same expression is adjusted in order to describe a good woman, malka tova, a good queen. So adjectives must agree with the noun that they modify in gender and number. But keep in mind that they must match according to the gender of the word, not its form. So in this example, we have the word eretz, which, although it has no ending, is conceptually a feminine noun. You can think of it this way: lands and cities are often thought of as being the mothers of their inhabitants, and as a result, they have a perceived feminine gender. The word tov, the adjective, must agree with the gender of the noun, not its form. So we have eretz with no ending, but we have the adjective tova with the feminine ending that matches. Now, in most cases, as you translate, you're going to find that you have an instinctive recognition of the function of the adjective within the sentence. Let's take a few examples and just see how this works. We have here the sentence, Amar Hamelech Hatov El Ish. Now, we know that in Hebrew sentences, there is the basic component of the sentence, and then there are the elements that add color and dimension to the expression. In this case, the last two words, to a man, are giving you extra information. The true main idea is comprised in the first few words. Amar Hamelech, the king said, the king spoke. Now, the full sentence says, the king said, namely, the good one, to a man. We know that the word tov modifies the king, both by its placement and by the fact that it has a definite article to match the king, whereas the word ish at the end is separated from the adjective. So we would very instinctively translate, the good king spoke to a man. In this sentence, we again find that we can instinctively recognize the function of the adjective. Shema ki hamelech tov. He heard that the king, a good one. Now, even saying it in that stilted English, you can tell that you have to supply the verb is, between the noun and the adjective. We know that the adjective goes with the word melech because it's placed in fairly close proximity to it, but it doesn't match exactly. It lacks the definite article, and it alerts us that something else is going on. It's not just the good king. We need a verbal idea in this sentence. And so we translate, he heard that the king was or is good. The king was a good person. Another example will also illustrate an adjective that takes the place of a noun. Kara el hatov, he called to the good one. Now, we understand that because it lacks an ending, it is masculine and singular. And in this context, we assume that it's designating a masculine singular individual. It would be appropriate to translate, he called out to the good man. And even in the stilted English, we can kind of intuitively sense that. He called to the good one. In context, it'll become clear what is intended. Here's a little more complicated sentence, but again, here we feel like we have a sense, as we read it, even in its most basic form, of what the author is trying to say. Adonai HaTzadik, the Lord the Righteous One, Va'ani ve'ami hareshaim, and I and my people, the wicked ones. When we put that together a little more quickly, the Lord the Righteous One, and I and my people, the wicked ones, we again know that we are expecting the verb is or was, and we're drawing a contrast between the Lord and myself and my people. The Lord is the one who is righteous, and I and my people are the ones who are wicked. This instinctive recognition will usually help you. There are some guidelines, though, and some terminology that will be helpful to clarify things for you. So as we define our terminology, we want to think in terms of several different categories of adjectives. The first category is illustrated in this sentence. Amar Hamelech Hatov El Ish. This is the sentence we looked at earlier that means the good king spoke to a man. In this particular example, the adjective and the noun that it modifies occupy the same syntactical slot in the sentence. What we mean by this is that you can actually eliminate one of those words and communicate essentially the same thing. So, Amar Hamelech El Ish, the king spoke to a man. Amar Hatov El Ish, the good man spoke to a man. And the individual described by Hatov is the same identity as the king, and the word functions as the subject of the sentence. Hamelech is the subject, Hatov is the subject. They occupy the same syntactical slot. In this case, the adjective is describing an attribute of the noun and nothing more. This is called an attributive adjective. It describes an attribute of the noun. In the second example, however, we find that there is a slightly different use of the adjective. Shama ki hamelech tov. He heard that the king, a good one. As we saw earlier, we anticipate the verb is in this context, and we find that the adjective and the noun occupy a different syntactical slot. Shama ki, he heard that. What follows should be a complete clause. It should contain a verbal idea, it should contain a subject, and so what he heard was the fact that the king is a good man, or the king is a good king. In this context, Hamelech functions as the subject, but the adjective functions in the verbal half of the sentence, what we call the predicate. The adjective serves as the verbal half of the sentence with an implied verb, and we basically have the equation X is Y. The king is good. Because of the fact that it serves as the verbal half of the sentence, this adjective is referred to as a predicate adjective. It means that it's indicating a sentence and occupies a different syntactical slot than the noun, which is serving as the subject. So, how can we tell the difference? Most of the time it will be from context, but there are some clear indicators when you have a predicate adjective rather than an attributive adjective. If the adjective stands before the noun, it is always a predicate adjective. In English, we always place the adjective before the noun. A good man, a good book, a good story. But in Hebrew, the most important information is not the adjective, it is the object that you are describing. It is the king. It is the book. And then when you want to clarify what that king or book is like, then you designate that it is the king, namely the good one. The adjective will always follow the noun if you are simply describing its attribute. So if the noun is preceded by the adjective comes first, it is immediately alerting you to the fact that this is a sentence. The adjective is occupying a different place in the sentence than the noun, and you need to insert the word is, are, was, were. You are making an equation. Tov, melech. A good one or good thing is a king. A king is good. So if the adjective comes before the noun, you are dealing with a predicate adjective. You are also dealing with a predicate adjective if the adjective does not match in definiteness. Hamelech tov, the king, a good one, or a good thing. The king is a good man. Here, the king is not being described as an adjective occupying the same slot in the sentence. If it did, it would have to match indefiniteness. Hamelech hatov, the king. Which king? The good one. An attributive adjective would have to match the definite article on the word king. So if they do not match indefiniteness, you are once again immediately alerted to the fact that this is a predicate adjective. The adjective is serving to mark the verbal half of a clause. Hamelech tov, the king is good. In all other contexts, you will have to rely upon the surrounding sentences in order to determine what it is that the author is trying to say. But at least in those two instances, you will immediately be alerted to where the author is headed. There are a couple of other contexts in which adjectives are used that we should briefly describe. One is in drawing a comparison between two or more individuals or objects. In this particular sentence, you see the statement that David tov min Shaul. Let's look first of all at just those first two words, David tov. We learned a moment ago that if an adjective does not agree in definiteness with the noun it is closely associated with, then it is a predicate adjective. Now, David is a proper name, so it does not have a definite article on it, but as a proper name, it is already specific. So if we were talking about good David, it should say David hatov, David, the good one. In this case, the fact that it does not have the definite article indicates it's a predicate adjective. David is good. But then we're given an extra bit of information and told that David is good from Saul. And what we mean by this is that David is good in comparison with Saul. And we would say he is better than Saul. Now, that same construction of the adjective with min can also be used to indicate that someone is the best, what we call in grammatical terms a superlative. In this case, the only difference is that you add the definite article onto the adjective. So here we have the same construction, only we are told that David hakaton min ha'anashim. David is the small one from the standpoint of the men. Now, the fact that he is the small one, not a small one, means that he is not small in comparison to the men. He is the smallest of the men. So, in many cases, you're going to have to rely upon context, but we have seen that there are some helps in terms of being able to figure out what the role of the adjective is in the sentence. We have seen that if the adjective comes first, it will always be a predicate adjective. Tov melech, a king is good, or in Hebrew order, a good one is a king. We also saw that if the adjective does not match indefiniteness, it must be a predicate adjective. In this case, Hamelech Tov, we see that the king is specified by the definite article. The adjective is not. We immediately know that we are creating a sentence. In all other contexts, you're going to have to rely upon what the author says and how he relates it. Now, let's just take one example of an adjective. We're going to use ha-tov, and I'm going to use it in 3 different contexts so that you can see the way that we sort this out in the context of what the author is saying. So here we have ha-tov in the sentence, Amar hamelech ha-tov el ha'ish. The king spoke, namely the good one, to the man. Ha-tov matches in gender and number and definiteness both hamelech and ha'ish. But its placement right after hamelech lets us know that it belongs with that particular noun and is describing to us that the king is a good man. Because we already have a verb, amar, we know that the adjective is not going to be a predicate adjective. We don't expect to have to supply the verbal half of the sentence. And we anticipate as we read that the adjective occupies the same slot in the sentence. This is an attributive adjective. He said, namely the king, namely the good one, the good king, to the man. The good king spoke to the man. The same adjective is used in another sentence, and in this case, we can perhaps immediately see that, 1, we have no verb, and as a result, we are going to have to supply one, and the adjective is most likely a predicate adjective. Hamelech hatov v'ha'am hara. The king, the good one, and the people, the bad one. Now, in this particular case, ha-tov again has the definite article. It again appears right after hamelech, but we learned that unless you're designating a predicate adjective because of its placement in front of the noun, or identifying a predicate adjective because it does not agree in definiteness, you always have to rely on context. The fact that it looks the same in its placement next to hamelech as it did in the previous sentence is irrelevant. The context demands a predicate adjective. The king is the good one, and the people, in Hebrew, viewed as a collective noun, as a whole unit, are then the evil entity, also singular to match the noun that it modifies. So we would translate this into good English as the king is the one who is good, and the people are the ones who are bad. In the last example, we again have the same adjective following Hamelech, and in this particular case, we again have a predicate adjective. The king is the good one from all the kings. We know we need a verb because the expression at the end, from all the kings, is a secondary phrase that just simply fills in the picture of the sentence. So the basic clause is Hamelech Hatov. We have no verb. We need to have a predicate adjective, but we can go further because in this particular case, not only is it a predicate adjective, it's combined with min to create what we call a superlative. The king is the good one from the standpoint of all the kings. The king is the best of all the kings. These three examples illustrate the way in which you have to rely upon context to decipher a predicate or attributive adjective when it does not have the clear and defining characteristics of a predicate adjective that appears before the noun or the adjective when it does not agree in definiteness. In most cases, you can see that your ability is going to be enhanced by what's going on in the context, and it should not give you too much trouble.